Hello and welcome to a new year at the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host Mike.
And I'm your co-host Alex.
And today we are starting off a new series. Just like last January we did a theme month, we are doing a new one this year. This one is called Lonely Sci-Fi Month, or at least that's like we don't have a clever, witty title for it, but
we don't. That's
the vibe.
It is the vibe. It is the vibe. Although, as we're talking about it now, I'm starting to get concerned. Some maybe seasonal disaffective disorder, like last January, it was talking about death. Now this January, we're talking about isolation.
That's definitely actually a real thing for me. And, and one of our titles, by the way, could have just as easily fit into last January, just traveling to Mars.
It could have been. It could have been.
Very easily. Like, I just didn't think of it, or maybe it wasn't even finished yet. Or it had just last. Maybe it was like the last issue just came out.
It maybe had just finished. Although I do think it's a little more fitting, you know, as we'll talk about when we get to that book, death and dying is part of that. But the story, it's not like super about that. I guess it is about.
It's not called dying to get to Mars. It's called traveling to Mars. It is about that trip.
But we'll get to that. We should mention Traveling to Mars is one of the books we'll talk about. But I guess kind of in order for the rest of the month here. Obviously, we're doing our 0 episode today preview. We'll do a quick preview and a rundown of all 4 books we're going to talk about. A lot of creators that we're going to talk about, we've talked about before, but we'll hit some of the other ones on these teams and give a little preview on those books here. But we're going to start off next week with Sentient, a book by Jeff Lemire, written by Jeff Lemire, who was one of my favorite creators.
Just passed the 12-month mark on having talked about him.
Obviously is Mike's favorite creator. Writer Jeff Lemire, artist Gabriel Hernandez Walta, and letterer Steve Wands. That's a book from TKO Studios. It's 6 issues, also available out in trade. The next week, as you just mentioned, Traveling to Mars, which was 11 issues, which is kind of a lot there, but it's only ever been collected in one trade. So it was never broken down into 2 trades, as you might expect.
Just get a head start going with a full head of steam.
Yeah, it's got a trade paperback. It also has a deluxe hardcover out there. That's from Ablaze Comics. That book is written by Mark Russell, who again we've talked about, with artist Roberto Meli, colorist Chiara Di Francia, and letterer Mattia Gentili. So it's a very, very Italian art team there,
right?
Working on that book there. Third week of the month, we're going to do Gone, a book written and drawn by Jock, the artist Jock. That is 3 issues, 3 oversized issues from DSTLRY. So they're the large magazine style, prestige or kind of premier square bound format. 6 issues out there, also available in a hardcover collection. I don't know if DSTLRY has done paperback collections of their releases. They may only be hardcover, but it's also available digitally. You can go and get that there. Working alongside Jock on that book, colorist Lee Lowridge and letterer and World Design, another other creators that we've already spoken of before. Then our final book is ApocalyptiGirl, an aria for the end times. That's a book written, drawn, and conceived by. Yeah, it's very musical name, which will come into play in that book. But it's written, drawn, conceived, lettered, everything by Andrew MacLean. That was only a trade paperback release. That was never. It was an OGN from the start. It's about a 10-year-old book at this point, maybe a little over that. It was initially published by Dark Horse in a paperback version, and then a few years back in 2020. They came out, Dark Horse kind of reissued it with a little extra material, like a little prologue and epilogue stuff, some additional stuff that MacLean had done. That was in a hardcover version. So there are 2 versions out there, said both from Dark Horse. And I want to make sure that is, it's just Andrew MacLean listed as the creator on that one. So those are our 4 books we're going to be covering: Sentient, Traveling to Mars, Gone, and ApocalyptiGirl. And all 4 of these books, as we mentioned, kind of deal with the idea of loneliness or isolation or maybe helplessness but
all induced by outer space.
Yeah, effectively
to
by
some
space.
Extent.
Yeah. But generally dealing in a sci-fi, there's, closer to the Martian, right, than any sort of like isolation in fantasy world. which is
That's
obviously
good. Yeah, that's a good call out.
which is its own kind of trope, and much like kind of isolated, lonely sci-fi is a trope. Just mentioned The Martian. That's a kind of prime example of this type of story, and we're going to kind of like we did with our previous theme months or theme episodes, is kind of look at these books individually and then also kind of collectively from like a 30,000-foot view of how each of these books kind of play with that trope or a version of the trope, and how they use that, or maybe work against archetypes or expectations to kind of tell their story, and how they rely on some of those, how they rely on what we the reader bring to these types of stories, and what our expectations are and how they play with that. So I know Mike and I, we've always had a fun time with these theme episodes, these theme months. Anytime we can kind of group some seemingly disparate comics together as a way to just talk about a whole bunch of other really great comic that may or may not warrant kind of their own kind of one-shot look, but when you can kind of group them together and find different ways to look at these stories.
Well, that's exactly what it is.
Ways
because
in different perspectives. It's
frankly, I mean, I love Jeff Lemire. I love Sentient. It actually, like, my main point of conflict here was like, we try to not cover anyone twice in the same 12-month window.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, do I really want to waste the next one on a short Lemire thing like this? But ultimately, like, the theme was just coming together too well. And I was like, Sentient, I can't now then leave Sentient on the cutting room floor in hopes of like squeezing some other Lemire series. Because, I think basically every October, I'm like, hey, Gideon Falls. And you're like, we already did him within 12 months.
Yeah.
So some year we'll hold off all the way till October and do Gideon Falls. Although, I mean,
we'll do Gideon Falls at some point. I promise you, Mike, we will do Gideon Falls
ish series, but it could also be a, like, it could just as easily be a multiverse, if there's a multiverse summer of multiversity summer or something like that. We could drop it in there sometime, but not this year because of Sentient. And we are strictly following our own made up rules.
Very important. You got to have a code. So
exactly.
So Sentient. I guess we'll start going through and giving a little preview of each of these books, and kind of, I don't know if you have the synopses pull up. I have.
I do. Well, I've got the first. I finally figured out, like, first issue listing on Comic Geeks is functionally the same as what you find on the website.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's from the publishers.
Sources, so.
So I've got them all.
Great. Well, let's start. We're starting off next week with Sentient. Let's start there, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we think this book is going to fit into our theme, and then we'll give a rundown of, again, like we always do, with the creators there, and also with some of these books we'll touch on the publishers, because out of these 4 books we're hitting on 3 publishers that we've never hit before, which is always kind of which is a weird thing specifically for this month, that we happen to have 3 kind of, I don't want to say off-brand, but in some case kind of off-brand.
They're off the beaten path.
Very much so,
yeah.
or very specific publishers. So let's go. Let's jump into Sentient real quick.
Yeah. So this is from Eisner Award winners Jeff Lemire, Black Hammer, and Gabriel Walta, The Vision. When an attack kills the adults on a colony ship, the onboard AI Valerie must help the ship's children survive the perils of space. Can Valerie rise to the task? Unlike other comic book publishers, TKO Studios offers a series directly to consumers. But I was like, we're about to start talking about that, which, by the way, is how I found this. I think I bought this, like the box set they sell of the single issues.
We'll get to TKO in a second. Yeah, we'll get there. So, all
right.
So Sentient. I mean, it's not purely not one person alone, but we're talking about children, right? This children, idea of
many of whom are young enough not to have had, like, socialization from adults.
Yeah.
You look at the cover for the first issue is a baby wrapped in a swaddling cloth being held by big AI tentacles.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going for.
So this idea of there's obviously this isolation here, right? This is a a colony ship they have a destination to get to, but yet they have no guidance. They are functionally helpless, and so you know will be kind of this book kind of explores what that looks like, and also dealing with some version of AI. This is not the true science fiction version of AI, not the kind of invasive stuff that we had that we're calling AI now. But yeah, the idea
compare
that
the onboard AI in this book from 2018, 2019, whenever Lemire would have written it, probably a year before.
Yeah, it came out in 2019. So
probably
yeah,
2018, he's thinking about AI this way.
Mm-hmm.
Compare that to Sarah Gailey's take on Know Your Station of what the AI is doing. Now, Sarah Gailey and Jeff Lemire, two very different thinkers. Respect them both, but they just are going to have different vantage points, even if you gave them the same prompt.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Gabriel Hernandez, Walta. I'll get him real quick. Again, Jeff Lemire, we've covered him a number of times. Go back on Underwater Welder,
right? And he's still busy, but he's
Ascender.
basically still doing Jeff stuff. I mean, it's like I think the only news on him since the last time we talked about him is a big return to DC work.
The writer on Absolute Flash,
Absolute Flash and JLA, right?
Yeah, he was writing JLA,
or at least he kicked it off. I don't know if
he kicked it off. Yeah, I don't know if he's still writing it or not.
When they announced him, I was like, oh, so he's doing the first trade. He's doing like 6 issues.
But he is the ongoing writer on. He's still the ongoing writer on Absolute Flash, and kind of being part of the Absolute universe right now is a bit of a big deal. So yeah, Lemire always kind of finds his way back. He also did another. We may have mentioned, maybe we didn't. He had done another Robin and Batman book. Him and Dustin Nguyen had done that. The first series they did was Dick Grayson as Robin. They just did another one for Jason Todd. So it feels like every couple of years Lemire swears off for higher work, and then all of a sudden he's there on specifically some DC work.
When you got an idea, you got an idea.
Yeah,
or
if they have a pitch for me.
Maybe you're like, every time I do this, I pick up 10,000 new fans who've followed me to my indie stuff, and you can just run the math on that and say, I'm going to make that much more money every time I publish an indie book if I throw DC a bone every once in a while.
But I wonder with something like the Robin and Batman stuff, those are, they're canonical stories, but they're non-continuous stories. Sorry, they're not happening continuously, right? So it's just an episode, a moment in time. So it's kind of free from whatever's happening currently. And then obviously, if you're writing in the Absolute line, you have effectively total freedom to do whatever you want with your character. So there's a complete reimagining of the rogues and everything happening in the Flash world, a world that Lemire knows well. So the idea that he has a chance to play with that and do something different, I can see how that would be enticing and exciting for someone who has spent a significant amount of time writing superhero comics as part of main continuity. The chance to get to do something different with familiar characters and really flip it on its head, which is what all the Absolute line has done so well. So
that I know that he has said in interviews and elsewhere that he's always been a lifelong Flash reader, which doesn't really surprise me.
No.
And he's never been offered the Flash. And when Scott Snyder pulls up and says, "Hey, we're doing this Absolute thing," and I think in my headcanon, Jeff Lemire's like, well, hear me out. Could I do it as Wally West? And they're like, we literally don't care. Like, we need a Flash title in the Absolute verse. It's all you, buddy. Like, you could combine them into one if you wanted.
Exactly. I not saying they had no guardrails for their Absolute titles, but I could definitely see them just being like, here's what we're doing with Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman. And then the next tier was Flash,
here's the next
Martian
10
Manhunter,
biggest selling characters. We need
and Green
something.
Lantern.
Right.
Yeah, and they saw what they were doing there, like, oh, we can take big swings, and so I can see how that would bring him back. So, but again, Lemire is someone we could talk about forever. He's someone we'll always return to because it is, it's one of our shared favorite creators. And because this is a non-big two book written by Jeff Lemire, Steve Wands is lettering it, as Wands letters pretty much everything that Lemire writes.
Anytime he's got to say
from a creator own.
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to cover him again, but we do have to talk about the artist, the amazing Gabriel Hernandez Walta. You mentioned there in the intro there, the book he's probably most known for in the industry is The Vision, which is the book he did with Tom King. It was the book that really put Tom King on the map. That was the book he was writing when he was offered Batman. You know, even though he had done some work at DC, The Vision was a book where people were like, wow, this guy has got something to say. And Walta's work on that, his designs of Vision and the Vision family, Virginia, Viv, and Vin, and Sparky the dog, all this stuff, absolutely incredible work. Stuff that you saw in the WandaVision TV show came from that book. That is like a super high watermark. And it came off of a run of Walta at Marvel where he had done a bunch of stuff. He had done a Magneto miniseries, maybe like a maxi series that was written by Cullen Bunn. He did a run on Astonishing X-Men. Right at the end of that run, that was written by Marjorie Liu of Monstrous fame. That was the end of the run that was started in the early aughts by Joss Whedon and John Cassaday. Also did a run on Doctor Strange with Donny Cates. So he had done a bunch of stuff at Marvel, but you know, The Vision with Tom King, that was kind of the pinnacle. You know, then he got this book here, Sentient, with Lemire, this book we're talking about here at TKO. And then after that, he's really continued to work with Lemire and kind of in the Lemire sphere kind of. He did a book at Dark Horse it was kind of part of Lemire's Black Hammer universe. He did a miniseries called Barbalian, which is kind of the Martian Manhunter analog in the Black Hammer universe. Right. The book was written by Tate Bromble, but story credit is given to both Bromble and Lemire because it's Lemire's character in Lemire's world. But that was like a 5 or 6 issue miniseries just focused on Barbalian, which was really, really cool. And he's also, his only current book that's ongoing right now is a book he's doing with Lemire over at Image called Phantom Road, which is a really kind of cool supernatural alien, maybe alien kind of thing going on. But that's kind of Walta's only current ongoing book. So he kind of got hooked up with Lemire, and as Lemire does, he goes back and works with the same artists over and over again. Dustin Nguyen, Andrea Sorrentino, now Gabriel Hernandez Walta. The idea that when he finds a collaborator he likes working with, and clearly he's someone that people want to keep working with, which I think is always really cool to see when the same team comes back together and works over and over and over again. So Phantom Road, really, really cool book to check out. That's going on right now. I guess the last thing I'll mention for Walta is he did contribute to an issue of The Unwritten, which I don't know. I'm sure we mentioned his name in passing.
Man. You may have, but I don't think
we may have mentioned it was one issue. It was one of the 0.5. It was 35.5 when they were doing those half issues, kind of interstitial, and they were bringing guest artists in for those 0.5 issues. And so he's credited as a co-artist with Peter Gross, who was the main series artist, but kind of dropping him in right there, doing some DC work. In that case, it was Vertigo work. But since it was a book we covered before, we may have mentioned Walta. That I'm sure I at least mentioned him at the time because, you know, he's a name we would have known from Vision with Tom King.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, in my defense, I was like drinking from a fire hose in that series because
there's a lot to get through, and then that was a lot of story.
There's a lot, especially when we were doing like 2 trades of interstitials. Yeah. It was like holy smokes.
And those 0.5s were even, you know, added even more to the reading agenda. But I guess before we go to our next series, I do want to talk a little bit about TKO because you mentioned that a little bit, in terms of what the release schedule was. Yeah. So TKO was when it started out was an interesting concept. They pioneered and then were the only ones to ever do it, and they stopped doing it. They pioneered the binge release of comics, if you want to call it that. It was that when a book came out, there were 3 ways you could get it, and you could get them all at the same time. You could get a box set of all of the single issues in physical issue. The only way you can get single issues is a completed box set. You could buy the trade collection, which is out the same day. So if you didn't want single issues, you get a trade, or you could get either one of them digitally. So you could get the single issues, but without the box set, but only digitally, or the trade digitally. So all three of those options were available at the same time. So it's hard to
what you own.
yeah.
The version of this you own says a lot about you as a reader. That's basically my takeaway.
Yeah,
it's like
it does. Yeah,
I own the single issues because one, I was gonna binge it anyway. But for a guy like Lemire, like if I can have single issues of something just in case I ever meet him, I'd rather have a single issue signed than a trade.
Yeah.
So I was like, yep, single issue. That's what it's gonna be.
It's an odd business model though. Because part of the idea of the way traditional comics come out of single issues, then trades and things like that, is they want people to double up on stuff. That's like the unwritten part of that, is that you have the single issues, then you buy the trades. When in this case, it's only one or the other. But that's what they were trying to go for. And I guess the real innovative part initially was that TKO did not work through distributors. At the time it was only Diamond. They didn't work through Diamond. They sold either directly to customers or directly to stores. So you ordered right from them, and you got your book strictly from them. So it wasn't something you could order through Diamond. Although that changed in 2020, I'm going to imagine probably because of the pandemic. But the first couple years of when it was founded in 2017, their first books came out in 2018. So 2018, 2019, 2020 had this kind of set, and they released like waves of books, like 3 or 4 books a year, and they had that same release schedule. Sentient was part of the second wave that came out in 2019. I don't know. Have you read any other books from TKO besides this one?
Yeah, in fact, I've often thought about suggesting. Is it Sarah? Sara?
Yes, Sarah. Yep, by
Sarah.
Garth Ennis.
That's got to be like one of their biggest. That and Garth Ennis is like, there are a couple guys like that whose names I see all the time, and they're mostly indie guys that I'm like, Garth Ennis, Warren Ellis. I'm like, how have we never gotten around to these guys in 4 years of doing an indie podcast?
Yeah, well, I personally, I'm not the biggest fan of those guys' writers, but they've done a lot. But Sarah is a really great book, and what I just found out researching this is that Ennis and Epting have a new book out on TKO called Partisan, which is also like a World War II spy kind of book, which I think just came out towards the end of 2025. So like, I got to go pick that up because in general, I love Steve Epting as an artist. Steve Epting, one of the co-creators of The Winter Soldier. We covered him when we talked about Velvet, the book that he did with Ed Brubaker. Sarah is one of the books that I've read. I've also read The Banks by novelist Roxane Gay. She's done a little bit of comics work. She contributed to the World of Wakanda spinoff over at Marvel, and artist Ming Doyle, who I know from a book called The Kitchen with Ollie Masters, which is really cool. But The Banks was pretty cool. But Sentient, I think, is probably my favorite of the books that I've read. Maybe just because
the creative
it's
team.
Lemire and Walta, probably, right. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, they've continued to release books a couple times a year, but pretty much at this point, it's strictly OGNs. It's completed stories from TKO, and they're generally just one volume. They do have a couple that are like multi-volume, like they have a book called Scales and Scoundrels. But the thing about that book is that when that book originally came out, it was on Image. It's a really fun book. It's kind of it's not quite maybe like an all ages kind of adventure, like high fantasy, swords and sandals kind of adventure story. But it was originally printed in over at Image. And then I guess the rights went back to the creators and they brought it to TKO, and it is now being distributed by TKO, which is a strange move. That's not one you see very often, but most of the stuff that starts on TKO is just like it's a 1-volume story, whatever fits in a trade, generally 4 to 6 issues of something. So there's still some books out there now.
It is interesting. I mean, have you noticed this before? I like just looking at their website. Mm-hmm. and they have theirs released in what they call waves.
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
Which I like.
Yeah.
I guess they do big. They collect all the stories, everything, and there's like, this is the batch we're releasing this year. That's wave one,
Yep.
wave
Yep.
two, wave three,
Yeah,
wave four,
like I
wave
said,
five.
it's only like 3 or 4 books a year. Maybe it's like 2 or 3 books a year or something like that. But yeah, they just have a release, say these are our books this year, and they throw them out there. And they've been doing that pretty much ever since, you know. So they don't have a ton of titles, but the ones they have, you know, they work with big name creators. Tim Seeley's got a book there. So we mentioned, you know,
Colin Bunn.
Ennis, yeah, Colin.
Yeah.
So they work with big names. And I guess, you know, it all comes down to what comfort level the creators have with the publisher in terms of, you know, what the contract is and what their rights are and things like that. But yeah, it isn't one that's got, you know, like it would be hard for them to overextend themselves because they are very clearly fairly restrictive in terms of what they put out, just because they only put out completed stories.
Well,
They don't
that
put out,
I think
you know,
you're
they don't
not
put out
as
single issues anymore.
you're not as likely to hear about them at your comic shop
Yeah.
because your comic shop is not as incentivized to sell them.
Well, yeah,
Um,
yeah. In the
so
and they
it's
do
just
have a
not something
distributor
that
now.
comes up in water cooler
Yeah.
talk.
Well, and they do have a distributor now, so you don't have to buy directly. So if you're a shop, you don't have to buy directly from TKO. But it is still it is the smallest of small press at this point in terms of kind of what they put out and what's available kind of out there. But you know, if you dig around and you can find some pretty cool stories there. So like I said, I'm going to check out this new book by Garth Ennis and Steve Epting, Partisan, just because that's the kind of book that's like right up my alley. But I didn't know it existed. I didn't know it existed until I was researching TKO again, specifically for this podcast
Yeah.
episode. You know, in that book came out, I want to say maybe November of 2025. So it's only a few months old, but for that to not even be on my radar, for me to miss that book completely, when I very much did enjoy Sarah, the first book they did at TKO. So for that to miss me entirely, not saying I'm the end all be all, but I like to think like I'm fairly hyper informed
Right, you're paying
about
attention.
comic releases. Yeah, like I pay attention far more than the average comic reader does. And so for that to have slipped me and to me to discover it that way, you know, let you know kind of where TKO falls, at least on my radar and in general, which is kind of a shame, but it's also kind of the hole they dug themselves in. That's just kind of where they sit in the comic world. They kind of put stuff out there without any real fanfare because they really don't have a presence like that. And
Right. There's not a big marketing team. I think they rely on creators to push stuff
probably
themselves
so.
on like,
Yeah.
here, make an Instagram post. And it's like, you know,
Yeah.
that will get some recognition there, but that's a lot of steps between, you know, having it and buying it. And by the way, since we're recording this with so little lead time, if you're listening to this episode the day it came out, there's probably still the New Year TKO sale, which is a buy one, get one free on any title of equal or lesser value. And you get, you know, free shipping at $35. Most of these are $17 a piece, like straightforward. So that being said, you buy 4 series, you get them for the price of 2 and you get it shipped free.
Yeah. Not
That's
bad.
pretty great.
Not bad. Not bad.
And
So,
I think there's easily 4 here I would read.
yeah,
Looking at
I think,
their relatively small catalog.
exactly. They you know, just if you see a creator that you like, because they're going to be creators that names that you recognize, pick it up, try it out. You know, there's some good stuff there. They're a publisher that I wish would get more buzz. Or maybe if they kind of become the place that says, hey, we just do completed stories. If you have an OGN idea, bring it here. You know, even though when they started out, they were still putting out single issues. So a book like Sentient still has quote unquote chapter breaks in it, right? Sarah still had chapter breaks in it. I'm curious about something like Partisan, some of the new stuff that's come out since they have kind of abandoned single issues. Do they still have those breaks, or is it just an OGN? I'm very curious to see that now that I know that it exists, because they could really kind of market and be the place of like, if you just want to have, if you have an OGN idea, you know, if you want to skip single issue entirely, this is the place to do it, because this is what we publish now. So that could be a pivot for them. Never know.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's Sentient. That's going to be our first week. I'm looking forward to that. Because again, that's a book I know both Mike and I really enjoy, because it's Lemire.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you know, I think it's a nice soft entry into this theme. Like it's not a dark, depressing book.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
which
yeah,
Lonely
yeah.
Sci-Fi suggests we're going to
It
have
can
a
it,
real moody month.
it can be.
That's
It
not
can be.
necessarily the case.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it would be the case for our next book if it weren't for the person writing it. So why don't we jump to Traveling to Mars, which is a book
Right.
from Ablaze Comics. You got that synopsis pulled up?
I sure did
Yeah.
somewhere. Give me just one second. But you know, Mark, we know we covered Flintstones and
Not all
Not
robots.
All
Back to
Robots. So
back. Yep.
we've done two for him already. Okay, so
Mhm.
here we go. You get the standard pomp at the beginning. From two-time Eisner and Harvey Award nominee Mark Russell and hot new talent. Now, this is the question. Robert Meli? Is that
Roberto Meli.
Roberto Meli.
Yeah,
I was so focused on the last name, I missed the first name. That's bad. We'll clean it up in post. Um,
definitely.
comes a compelling new sci-fi series, Traveling to Mars, tells the story of former pet store owner Roy Livingston, the first human to ever set foot on Mars. Roy was chosen for this unlikely mission for one simple reason. He is terminally ill and therefore has no expectation of returning. Roy is joined on his mission to Mars by Leopold and Albert, two Mars rovers equipped with artificial intelligence, who look upon the dying pet store manager as a sort of god. Against the backdrop of not only his waning days, but those of human civilization as well, Roy has ample time to think about where things went wrong for both of them and what it means to be a dying god. A riveting story of planetary exploration and of finding meaning in your final days.
Now, I gotta say,
Sounds good.
yeah, but also like that's almost not that's like more than a synopsis, and that's the official blurb. Like
I think
that's
Mark
almost like
wrote
a
it.
full
Yeah.
recap. Yeah,
Right. I think Mark
there's a
wrote it.
lot there. There's a lot
I
there.
mean,
So you know,
there is because, but what that tells you, or what it tells me anyway, is that it's not about the plot. Like
yes,
this
yes.
is the setup, right? And I was going to ask, when you read like, you know, prose novels or nonfiction books, are you like a highlight and underline, right in the margin type person?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I'm very much one of those people.
Mm.
And this is one of the first comics I've ever wanted to do that too. I'm like, oh, man, that's so good. Like I wanted to like dog ear pages and get out a big highlighter and be like, oh, I gotta remember that. That's a really good quote. And you know, he's just one of those writers for me.
He is.
Um,
And I want to jump. You said there this idea of the reason they put so much in this is that the idea that Roy is dying, and that's why he's going into Mars. That's not the point of the book. So that's not supposed to be a surprise. Oh my gosh, this guy, we gotta, they're telling you that up front to be like, this is what you're buying into, you know? Um, this is a Joe versus the volcano situation here, right? You're doing this because you have no other choice, because you're someone who has all you have to live for is the living that's left, right? And the book is an exploration of what that means. It isn't some surprise of like, oh my gosh, what happened to this guy? So the idea that they are quote unquote spoiling that for you here is obviously, you know, they want the reader to be in a certain mindset, right?
right. It's not a spoiler if they don't care.
Yeah, yeah, because
And this is my favorite type of
yeah, well,
setup.
it's because that is, while it's important to the story, it's not about the reveal that he, oh my god, he's dying. You know, you know that going in, and so your mindset reading the book from the start is looking at his actions as a character, already having this information because they want you to have that information. And I think something like that is good. Because this is the type, if you're just told the story of, yeah, this is a guy who's terminally ill and he is becoming the first manned mission to Mars solely because so he can do it and then die. Like that's pretty bleak, right? At its
Right.
surface, it could be really bleak. But if you know Mark Russell, and again, if you somehow hear and you haven't gone back and listened to and read along with the Flintstones and Not All Robots to get a sense of the type of writer that Mark Russell is, you know that there's going to be a lot of completely absurd humor in situations, but also like a lot of deep like pathos and exploration. You know, there's gonna be a lot of soul searching. It's going to be introspective while also being kind of silly at the same time. because that's what Mark Russell does. It's what he does best. I think he's one of, if not the best satirist in comics right now.
Yeah.
And so the idea of give him a lens to look at the world, to look at society, to look at humanity. And he's not going to miss with that. And here he's chosen his lens as someone with nothing else to live for except reflect back on his life, reflect back on humanity, reflect back on civilization. So it's a book that will have heavy moments at times. It'll have light moments at times, but this is the true, like, lonely sci-fi, right? He is a human by himself. Yeah, he's got some robots there. He's got some AI there. Again, we're dealing with levels of AI, but there is no direct human contact here. This is a man by himself.
Right.
This is the Funhouse mirror version of The Martian.
Well,
literally.
It's interesting you say. I mean, Project Hail Mary as well. Same thing. And what these all have in common is they are all epistolary. Like it's all the communication is in letter writing. Yeah. Now, in blanking on the author's name,
Andy
Weir was he's always like they're always doing like scientific entry logs.
Yes.
Whereas this is a personal memoir / letter that at the beginning of the book you don't really even know who he's writing it to. Is it for himself, his own catharsis? He's including sketches and pictures and things like that. You find out, and this is the first issue, not a spoiler, he didn't get to say goodbye to any of his family that he had. Yeah. So maybe he's been promised that it's going to be given to his family. Maybe it's going to be published when he becomes the hero who was the person who set foot on Earth. So you don't know that at the beginning. All you know is this guy's writing this down for us, and everything is being written, but not to us. Yeah. And we're not even
getting
sure
to
who
read
us is. We get to read it. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. We
because that's the thing. Insight. It's like I don't really like that. It's only a joke when like in Deadpool, but that type of like I'm going to turn to you and explain everything.
Yeah,
very 80s movie type thing. A lot of books are written that way. It's like who's telling the story? Yeah. Like the author is themselves a character with a point of view that often goes unacknowledged. And so anyway, I like the epistolary style. I would get tired of it if it was a really, really popular and overused thing, but it's really not.
Well, it really, I think people are afraid because there's a tropey aspect to it, right? The idea of you're writing this to someone, it gives you freedom as a writer to write like someone who's writing, to be observational in that way. So yeah, I think maybe there's a fear of it being overused, but here, yeah, you're right. It makes total sense because you don't know. Is he writing this because someone is going to read it? Is he writing it with the hopes that someone's going to read it? Is he writing it knowing that no one's going to read it? Is he writing it just for himself? All those things are on the table, and we, the reader, have, the point is we, the reader, aren't included in that calculus, but we get to read all of his thoughts. We get to read all of it and see what he's thinking, what he's going through, not knowing if the things we're reading are ever supposed to be read for an audience.
Right.
Yeah. So, or a greater audience, maybe it's an audience of one that it's supposed to be, but we still get to see it. So yeah, it's a great setup for this type of story, this type of isolation, this type of loneliness, to really get inside the character's head because there's no one else to talk to. But we should go ahead. You mentioned Roberto Meli, the artist. This book is essentially his only interior work in the U.S. He's done some covers, variant covers at Ablaze and at Dynamite. He also did one for Batman Dark Age, which is a weird, kind of fun book that Mark Russell did.
Don't you dare go after that book.
No,
you can call it weird. That's fair game. But I
weird. Yeah.
adore that book.
Yeah, Batman Dark Age. He did one for Superman Space Age as well. That Mark Russell did both those with Michael Allred. Legendary comic artist. Yeah. So it makes sense that Meli would do, having worked with Russell on this, did a variant cover for one of the issues there. The colorist Chiara Di Francia also effectively hasn't done a whole lot of work in the US outside of Dynamite. I think she's covered a bunch of comics over at Dynamite for both the Thundercats franchise and the Red Sonja franchise and their various spin-offs and related titles there. And also she's listed sometimes as a colorist for books either written and drawn by Mirka Andolfo, who is kind of a fairly big name, well-known creator, has some stuff, done a lot of stuff at Image and other creator-owned work. I'm going to guess that's the Italian connection right there. I think maybe she's done some color or some color assists for Andolfo on some of her work. The letterer as well, Mattia Gentili. This is much like Meli, the only work effectively he's done in the U.S. So outside of Mark Russell, essentially a mostly kind of unknown team, which I think is interesting. But maybe that's kind of thing you get with Ablaze. Ablaze, as a publisher, a lot of international content, both from international creators printing new work, also for reprints, so stuff that hadn't previously existed in the U.S. So they are kind of an avenue for that. They do have a book, Animal Castle, by Xavier Dornson and Felix Delep, that is kind of in the line of, Animal Farm, Animal Pound, Stray Dogs.
I've pitched that book before.
Yeah. And if we do that, that would be we would probably do that with Animal Pound or We Three and Stray Dogs.
Anthropomorphic animals. Yeah.
Yeah. Storytelling metaphor through that. But that's one of the books that I know is fairly popular from Ablaze. I also read a kind of cool book about magic in the real world called The Agent, by Matteo Gabella and Fernando De Guino. That was kind of a cool book, but Ablaze again is a real small publisher. They have some horror stuff out there right now. I think they have like a Nosferatu book out, which is, horror's always like a reliable genre to get into once you're in it. But, Ablaze is not a publisher that I have a lot of experience with. I don't think you do either. But if I have one thing to say about them, I think they do bring in a lot of international content and thus a lot of international creators, which I'd imagine is maybe somehow how Mark Russell got hooked up with Meli and the rest of that team there, who I'm assuming are all working out of Italy, to get some newer talent, unknown talent in the US at least, get them on a book with someone like Mark Russell, because Mark Russell is going to bring his audience. Mark Russell is one of those writers that when people found him, like immediate season passes. Right. He's one of those writers that just has a following, not the biggest following, but a consistent following.
There's also I gave the Flintstones to my father-in-law who likes comics, kind of grew up reading them, trailed off in the 80s when he had kids. And he handed it back to me and said, "Thank you for the very weird Flintstones book."
Yeah.
It's like, you're welcome.
Yeah. But he has a name that has weight in comics, that
right. And mileage may vary. Like
of course,
I pushed it a little hard because I was so giddy after talking about it on the podcast.
His style's not for everyone, but for those that it hits with, like every single one of his books is going to hit. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're bought in on his style, then like you are going to be in for any book that he writes on any publisher. And Russell writes for every single publisher, effective almost, like a bunch of places like Scout and Ablaze, some of these like really small, like when you look at the publisher data in terms of like units sold every month or every year or whatever, there's Marvel, there's DC, there's Image, and there's everybody else. And then everybody else, the big chunk of that is something like Boom or Dark Horse or IDW. And then there's like a 1% of the all comics sold in the US. That's a combination of like 35 small independent publishers. Like Ablaze is one of those that's in that like 1%. It's the super small. But anytime you get a name that's notable from their work, either on their own creator-owned stuff elsewhere or the big two like Mark Russell, we can shine a light on some of these publishers like Ablaze, who we probably otherwise wouldn't have covered if we didn't have a book like this.
Let me tell you, I did not track. I got this book when issue 1 came out, but I was not tracking it really ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So I was at the mercy of comic shops who happen to, you know, see Mark Russell's name and order enough, which I gotta tell you was not a lot.
Not a lot.
There's
Not
a
a lot.
lot of comic shops in town,
Yep.
and this was basically a pre-order only type book.
Yeah. It.
Luckily, Diamond still had some. So the final shop I went to, he looked on the computer. He's like, "Look, I don't have it because I didn't even order any, but I can
Yeah.
get it for you, like
Yeah.
first issue, first print, no problem. And then I'll pull the rest." And I was like, "Perfect, take my
Yeah.
money."
But yeah,
Um,
it also didn't help that it's 11 issues, but it took like a year and a half for the book to come out, and
I was
and
gonna
and
say I felt like it took forever.
there were some gaps in there, and then I think the last couple issues, like it was like 2, 3 issues and a gap, another couple issues, a gap, and then the last 3 or 4 issues came out every 2 months.
Wait,
So
wait. This makes okay. That
yeah,
this makes sense out of my comic geeks because I stopped after issue 6. I was like,
yeah,
what the hell happened? But once it started getting into the like, not only do you have to seek it out, but it's going to come out like 4 times a year.
yeah.
That's when I'm like, I just lost track of it.
Yes, it made it hard on itself because of what again. Who knows why where the delay was, but the end result is the book was delayed and it took a long time to come out. And anytime you have those gaps in a book like that, especially from a small publisher, it's harder for shops to keep it in stock, because people aren't asking for it. They don't know to order it. They don't know when it's going to show up on FOC for if they can order it. They're not helping themselves there. So there's some, potential issues as to where it may have been, but now that it's completed and you can get a nice collected edition of it, it's a book that hopefully finds its audience later, because I get a sense that's kind of a recurring theme for Mark Russell's books, because he publishes in a lot of different places, a lot of smaller press stuff. People don't often see it, but maybe they see a collected trade on a shelf somewhere at a bookshop, in a comic shop. Easier to sell. Oh, it's a Mark Russell book. I didn't know about that one. They pick it up and they find it later. This is a book that I think is ripe for that, because there's still an evergreen quality to this book, I think. You know?
Oh, sure. I mean,
You
is
know?
there anything funnier than the fact that there's like a deluxe edition of Prez now? Like
Yeah.
his run that got canceled after 6 issues. They dumped it in hardback and then it sold well enough eventually to get a paperback. And now there's a deluxe Prez. And I'm like, I want to buy that just to read his letter in the front of the
Yeah.
deluxe edition after reading his letter in Flintstones deluxe edition where he was like, well, that sucked. Um, so anyway, maybe he's gratified by all of the new following.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, he's done pretty well for himself in comics since then. So, it was a rough initial entry for him, but I think he's found his footing and found his audience there. So Traveling to Mars, that's going to be week 2 for us. Moving on to week 3 is a book called Gone.
God.
Yeah, very simple title. Kind of explains what it is there. It's a book from DSTLRY, which we'll talk about, probably the newest comic publisher on the block. But yeah, why don't you go ahead with the synopsis if you got to pull it up.
Yep. On an impoverished and distant planet where menial workers scratch out a living resupplying starships, the best place to be is gone. All caps. I don't know why.
Okay.
And that's exactly where 13-year-old Abby wants to be. ABI? Abby? I'm gonna go with Abby.
Abby. Okay. All right.
That was
saying,
in my head. Word.
I was saying Abby, but we'll say Abby. I'm good
Okay.
with that.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Along with her street tough friends, Abby stows away on a colossal luxury space liner for a chance at a better life. Unbeknownst to her, some of her friends are not who they seem. Abby suddenly finds herself branded as a saboteur as she desperately struggles to evade the ship's deadly crew and to stay alive. Beautifully written and drawn by Jock. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Jock now.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so this book here, this idea that it's a stowaway, it's a girl jumping on a ship, seeking adventure, ends up somewhere where unexpected, right? And so this idea of you can have a sense of isolation even when you're amongst some people, a lot of people, if those people aren't who you thought they were when you started, right?
Right.
So it's another kind of spin on that, and that's I think where this book fits in. But yeah, we'll talk about Jock, aka Mark Simpson. He's a Scottish creator. I don't know if you know Jock's real name, if you ever knew
I
that
didn't
before.
know.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. But he goes by Jock. The first thing I'll say is he has like countless covers across the spectrum. He's one of those artists that just has a style that people think is cool because it is. And so if Jock's got a cover out there, people are going to buy it. If it's an incentive cover, people are going to want it. It's something that he does and has done a lot of, and is, I'm sure, very fruitful part of his career. Like
Can
most
I tell you
creators.
my low point with Jock?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like with like shows how how I'm just one of those people you described. When he was doing All-Star Batman, he was only doing the covers. This is Rebirth era. I
Yeah.
think it was issue 6 had Batman fighting Mr. Freeze,
Sounds
and
about right.
the A cover was Batman in the snow in a real jockey pose, and the variant cover was the same exact thing, but he had a helmet on, like a Freeze helmet, and I bought both because it was like, well, I mean, he took the time to draw two, so I'm gonna buy two. And it's just like I don't know who's buying the non-Jock variant for that book. But I'm sure,
Well,
there's
yeah, people
everybody has
do.
different taste.
They do. They do. They do. Before he's probably best known in the States for his work at DC, specifically his work with Scott Snyder. But like everyone in the UK, at least almost everyone, he got to start doing stuff on Judge Dredd over on, 2000 AD, which is the place that every comic artist in the UK seems to start. But eventually started working over at DC, specifically on the Vertigo stuff, like Hellblazer and Faker. He did that with books with Mike Carey. Mike Carey we know from The Unwritten. He was co-created The Losers with Andy Diggle. He did the covers on Scalped, which is the Jason Aaron book with artist R.M. Guerra. Then he started doing kind of mainstream stuff over DC. He started drawing on Detective. He did a short run with Greg Rucka, and then got on with Scott Snyder. At the end of the first run of Detective, right before New 52 happened, he was in the arc that's collected called The Black Mirror, which is a kind of a horror based, but I think that puts Scott Snyder on the map as a Batman writer, and the strength of his run on a detective is what got Scott Snyder Batman #1 when they did New 52, when it relaunched
And the
with
strength
him
of
and
that led
Capullo.
to the
Yeah.
Absolute Universe.
Yeah. They did it showed what Snyder could do with Batman. Jock was a big part of that, on Detective. Speaking of that New 52 run, I know one of the issues that you come back to a lot and have mentioned a number of times.
Yep.
Batman 44 of New 52 run that was written by Scott Snyder and Brian Azzarello together, guest artist by Jock. It's notable for two things. One, it was the origin of a new villain that we haven't seen again, but it was at the time a new villain, but it was also dealing, I believe, with like the murder of a young black teen by a cop. If I'm
Yeah.
not if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Like
it's a
he was
story.
tracking
It's
down Penguin.
yeah, the B
but-
story. Yeah,
right.
that Batman is following in Gotham. It is a book that is revered for that, the way it was handled, the way it was depicted. I don't know why specifically they brought Jock in for that, other than it was a guest artist, it was a one shot, and see someone that Snyder is familiar with. But I
Yeah.
think Snyder and
And
Azzarello
as
did
I
a great job with
recall,
that issue.
it's been a while since I picked that issue up, but as I recall, I remember Batman being so locked into one of Penguin's men did this that he had a
Yes.
blind spot to
Yes.
the police doing this.
Yes, yeah. There's a
And
bit of
that was like the big reveal.
yeah. There's a bit of check your privilege at the door, Batman, on that there. But after that, his DC work, Jock's DC work, is essentially all stuff with Scott Snyder. You mentioned All-Star Batman. They did a miniseries for the Batman Who Laughs, which is a character that Snyder created during the Dark Knight's Metal stuff. He just recently, at the end of 2025, guested on Absolute Batman, Absolute Batman 15, which was the full reveal of the Absolute Universe Joker, which is a crazy, like, abomination creature. So the fact that when they went to reveal that, they went and again brought in a guest artist. Nothing against Nick Dragata, the series regular, but you know, there's something about seeing Scott Snyder and Jock work on a Batman title together. At this point, there's so much history, and people know that it's going to be something big, something worth checking out. He also has a pretty cool book. I don't know if you read this one. It's a Black Label book called Batman One Dark Night. It's a issue, three issue
and he wrote
Black
that
Label
too,
book.
right?
Yeah, you writer artist at, which I think is the first time he's writer artist at a DC book. Black Label, oversized, prestige format, much like we see with DSTLRY. But that's it's a pretty cool book where Batman's got to transport a villain EMP across Gotham back to Blackgate Prison in the middle of a heat wave and a full blackout in the city. So him having to deal with all sorts of things as he kind of makes his way across town with a supervillain in tow. So pretty neat idea, pretty cool stuff. Gorgeous looking book. I'm not always the biggest fan of like the magazines, the oversized magazine style, unless you get an artist that's really, really good that I really, really like on it. So seeing Jock stuff on that, whether it's One Dark Night here or on the book we're talking about, Gone, that oversized page, the bigger issue, it looks really, really cool.
I mean, my complaints about the oversized thing are more logistical, practical, you know, the $9 issue, the storage,
special bag and board, special box for it. Yeah. I have a short box just for magazine size, just for the ones that I want to keep for the special issues, the ones that are like that, which aren't a lot. She mentioned a couple other books.
There's one I want to mention.
Which I'll say
Unheralded.
He has a book. He has a book on Image with Scott Snyder called Witches, which is a really cool horror book.
Oh yeah,
that is currently being adapted. I think it's actually been greenlit, coming as an animated series to Prime Video, which I'm very looking forward to. That that's really, really cool. And then he has a book with Jeff Lemire, which started out on Comixology as a Comixology original, means digital only. Eventually reprinted, or not reprinted, actually printed in trade collection over Dark Horse called Snow Angels, which is a really kind of cool book that he did with Lemire. So kind of tying it back with our first book, Sentient, there, that you can get from Dark Horse. I think it's 2 volumes of that. They did 2 seasons of that initially over at Comixology. Also has another book with Scott Snyder because they always work together. Well, I'm going to say it's another book. I'm not quite certain. It's called You Won't Feel a Thing. It's another book at DSTLRY. It's kind of a detective story. 1 issue came out. It was pretty cool. Issue 2, TBD. Any more after that? No idea. DSTLRY, little iffy on its publication and when stuff comes out. When it does come out, it's often pretty good. Actually, let me check that. When it does come out, it's often really good because they have awesome creators, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But sometimes the books just don't come out, or they come out whenever, after super crazy delays. So we mentioned at the top real quick, colorist Lee Lowridge. Jock doesn't always color his own work. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. He's worked with Lowridge a lot as a colorer. We've talked about him and talked to him specifically around the time we talked about The Good Asian a couple years back. Had a great interview with Lee. And the letterers and Roll Design, the lettering studio there, who we've mentioned before a number of times. The most recent time, I think, was actually last year at this time, because Ann World Design lettered the Manny Death and Layla Starr, which we did in Death Month last year. So they're a studio and collaborators who work on a bunch of different stuff there. So did you have a book you said you wanted to mention that maybe I didn't hear?
Well, I don't think you'd be inclined to mention it because I don't know that it's really that heralded of a book, but I would say his work with Annie Diggle on Green Arrow Year One was heavy influence for the Arrow show, which
that's right,
spawned a 9-year run from that, 9 years from the Flash. God knows how many seasons that other show had.
That is true.
And it's like all of that spawned, and the whole visual aesthetic of his time on the island, I think, is very Jock coded.
It is.
especially seasons
It
one
is.
and
No.
two. Um, so it's like that's just like a little 6-issue book like that was not particularly prestige. It's not like listed as a classic in
No.
anyone's mind. I love it. I thought it was really a great version. In fact, when I read it was after I had seen the show, so you can't
Wow.
unsee the show.
Yeah.
But I thought it had come out around the same time as the show, and I thought it was a retcon of like, well, we're going to take the Green Arrow, but kind of morph him into what this TV show is doing, just so it's not so jarring. Other way around. Like
Yeah.
this was a reinvention, and you go back to like that book came out in '07. You look at Green Arrow in '01 for like Kevin Smith's run. He still has the goofy green like Pied Piper hat, the Fu Manchu.
He's still Robin Hood. He's still Robin Hood.
He's still Robin
Errol
Hood.
Flynn.
And
Errol
Flynn,
it's yes.
very like bright poppy, like it looks like it could have been from the '80s. And then to have this kind of reimagining, and it caught someone's imagination over at Warner Brothers CW. And then you just see this, huge empire. I'm not saying, I guess I am saying in a way, like you wouldn't have the Flash season 1, super fun show of TV without Green Arrow year 1 comic written by Andy Diggle and illustrated by Jock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Again, Diggle, someone he worked with on The Losers. So someone he is familiar with. And
there you go.
A reinvention of a character made him a little grittier, made him a little more Batman-y, let's be honest.
And that was people's complaint about the longtime Green Arrow readers did not like that show.
Yeah,
because they are not allowed to allow themselves to enjoy things that isn't exactly what they expected.
But no, the Arrowverse was wildly popular, and I think on the average across all the shows, if you look at Green Arrow, all the shows and all the seasons of Green Arrow, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and Supergirl, overall, I think it was really, really good. It's really, really well done.
More hit than miss.
Yeah.
And they were certainly
well.
doing, and they were certainly doing, like like no one's doing that now. Like that's a dead art form of like the weekly grind of the 22-week, 24-week season, whatever it was, and I just rewatched Flash season 1. Totally holds up. I had a blast. It was like I'm rocking a newborn baby right now, and it was like soothing. It was on, and you don't have to use your brain that much, but like you're also a villain of the week, so my wife could just walk in the room, plop down. It's like, oh, who is it this week?
If you meet those shows where they are perfectly enjoyable and for the most part very well executed. If you think they're supposed to be something more than that, that's when you're disappointed. But that's a great call out, because I had forgotten about that was, if not the full inspiration, a heavy influence on what the show ended up doing.
It's just very tough because I really enjoyed that book, but you can't talk to Green Arrow fans about it because by and large they didn't really like it.
They did,
and if Green Arrow fans aren't buying a Green Arrow book, literally no one is. I think it had to be a pretty low print run.
But it was that year once that was meant to be kind of reinventions. Here's a new way to look at the origin.
Right.
But the fact that it then spawned and helped kick off what the show became, which then brought more attention to the character, which you would think would be a good thing. But if those hardcore fans don't like it,
I like it, so
wrong.
I own it. And that's the toxic mentality. Anyway.
So anyway, I mentioned DSTLRY a couple of times. DSTLRY was just founded in May of 2023 by two former executives who worked over at Comixology before it was bought by Amazon and completely ruined. So these people that understand comics and want to work in it, and once that position no longer, became tenable at Comixology, these two guys started a new company, a new publisher with a heavy focus on creators and, in my mind, a less good idea, but a heavy focus on collectibles, both physical collectibles and digital collectibles. Like they sell a bunch of like digital only covers, which is basically just like an image, but like they're not NFTs and nothing stupid like that. It's just like you can buy a digital cover.
They sell digital remarks on their covers.
They do. It's weird. I don't like it, but like I said, the books they actually put out are really, really dope for the most part.
And at that point, who cares? Like what else they're doing in their market?
Exactly. If that brings them extra money, great. And creators, especially the kind of the founding creators, like they have equity stakes in this. So like it's not a creator-owned publisher, but it's pretty damn close to it. You know, like it's a heavy focus on creators, and they have a killer lineup there. But the first they put out was called The Devil's Cut #1. That came out in August 2023. That was a bunch of kind of short stories. It was 11 different short stories from all the founding creators of Distillery. There are 15 founding creators. I'm going to list them off real quick here and see if you recognize any of these names. Scott Snyder, James Tynan IV, Tula Lotte, Mirka Andolfo, Jock, Becky Cloonan, Brian Azzarello, Mark Bernardin, Elsa Chartier, Lee Garbett, Joel Jones, Stephanie Phillips, Ram V, Jamie McKelvey, Junko Mizuno. Any of those people write any comics that you've liked, written or drawn any comics that you've liked in the past 20 years?
My copy of Devil's Cut is signed by more than one of them.
Yeah. And that Devil's Cut #1, only printed that one time, never reprinted again. Which not the greatest thing, but yeah, that issue, that version, that single issue that had like 45 variant covers, because they got some of the most amazing artists and comics there. But yeah, that idea of, and all those short stories, not all of them, but a lot of those short stories were basically intros or kickoffs to stories that would come later, including Gone. Gone was actually the first actual book that Distillery put out. And it was a continuation of Jock's story in The Devil's Cut, which was called The Stowaway, which is very fitting for our theme of Lonely Sci-Fi. But yeah, it was the first book that came out. A lot of the books run about 3 issues. That's kind of their set. A couple of them, like a book called Life, I think it's gone 7 or 8, but a lot of them were just like 3-issue books. And said almost all of them are super, super dope. I'm not going to list. I wrote a bunch down here. I'm not going to list through them all right now because it's just a lot to get through. But they're incredible creators. They're all in that oversized format. Again, when they come out, when they release, the stories are so good. The art is beautiful. It looks great on the page. It's super high quality paper. I just wish they were more predictable. I wish they were more reliable when it comes to their solicitations, because
it's the hardest part of starting a publisher.
There's a book that has been solicited multiple times. It's yet to come out. The one I will mention, it's by Ram V and Joel Jones, 2 of my favorite creators in all of comics. It's called Through Red Windows. That has been on the solicitation, coming out, and then not, and then delayed, and then again. Now I think it's just TBA. Like, I don't know if those books are even happening anymore. But it's a book, when I see it, I want to buy that because I love those creators. I love Ron V. I love Joel Jones. I want to read that book, and I can't have it because as far as I know, it may not even exist anymore. I don't know. And that's what you get sometimes, with these kind of startup publishers, even when they have massive, massive names attached to them. Even though we have some of the literal biggest creators in all of comics. Sometimes you don't get the books. We just mentioned, just a few months back, we just did November by Matt Fraction and Elsa Chartier. And in that, we talked about the book that she is doing with James Tynan IV at Distillery called The City Beneath Her Feet. Issue 1 had come out, big delay to issue 2, which had just come out, I think, when we were talking about November, and issue 3 allegedly coming out sometime in early 2026 as we're recording this now. I don't know if I have any trust that book's coming out in early 2026. I believe it will come out at some point, but I'm not certain I trust the date that's on the solicitations right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know it's going to come out, but I don't know when.
Well, I knock on wood that Distillery stays afloat long enough for things to come out.
I hope so.
There's also that.
There's always a fear there, but again, it's got so much star power behind it. I don't want to say it's too big to fail because it can always do that, but like,
no one's ever regretted saying something was too big to fail.
Never. It's never gone wrong.
There's no buybacks on that.
There's so much star power and so many creators, writers and artists that, as you mentioned with someone like Mark Russell, that just have their legion of fans that no matter what they do, they will always buy their books. And it's not about having the biggest audience and selling, hundreds of thousands of copies. It's about selling your book to every person who's always going to buy it. Having a reliable number that you put a book out, this number of people are going to buy it. Doesn't matter what publisher it's on. And I think Distillery is counting on a lot of that. And then those people, when they buy those books, maybe staying on buying some of the digital collectibles, those remarks and things like that. getting some of those add-ons there as like a benefit, a perk, something extra for those hardcore fans. But they're relying on those fans to come and buy those books from these creators because they like Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV. They like Becky Cloonan and Tula Lotay. They like Chip Zdarsky. They like Brian Azzarello and Eduardo Risso, Joe Henderson, Lee Garbett. They recognize these names, Stephanie Phillips, Marcus Toe. They recognize these names and they want to read those books. So hopefully that's enough to keep them going because I'm just a huge fan of so many of these books that have come out. And I think it's interesting, and we'll get into about someone like Jock, who is known as an artist, who has done a little writing, but mostly as an artist, kind of given a platform to write and tell his own story, own original story versus telling a Batman story, which
Right.
you assume most people who have worked on Batman in any capacity have a Batman story. And I think that's what One Dark Knight was for him.
I frankly think most people who read Batman have a Batman story in their minds.
Probably sure, but they don't get a chance to actually.
Right. No,
they don't get a chance to actually
all that
execute
say.
it. Yeah.
Anyone who gets an opportunity jumps at it. I don't think anyone's been like, Batman? Let me think on it.
Yeah, I got a miniseries, an oversized miniseries to tell my Batman story.
Yeah.
No,
oversized miniseries. I'm gonna go to Marvel. I've got a Danny Rand story I really want to tell.
Yeah.
But said no one ever.
Yeah, but the idea that he's given a platform here to tell an original story and kind of see how that works and see how that progresses, I think is really cool. So looking forward to get to Gone here in week 3. Which brings us to our last book here of the month, ApocalyptiGirl. Again, colon
one word.
and ApocalyptiGirl, colon and Aria for the End Times. This is a book again, written, drawn, lettered, colored, everything by Andrew MacLean from Dark Horse Comics. Mike, why don't you go ahead with the synopsis you have?
Yep. We've got Alone at the End of the World. Aria is a woman with a mission. As she traipses through an overgrown city with a cat named Jellybeans, Aria is on a fruitless search for an ancient relic with immeasurable power. But when a creepy savage sets her on a path to complete her quest, she'll face death in the hopes of claiming her prize. And that's a trade paperback, 96 pages. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Get out to your story.
You break that down, that's about 3.5 issues, maybe 4 issues, depending on what you're looking at. But yeah, so it's this is a isolation story of a person trapped on a planet. There are sci-fi elements here. There's spaceships and robots and things like that. But she is basically trapped on a planet with an indigenous culture, as you'll find out. See, it's not a spoiler to say, since the creepy savage kind of gave that part away. But yeah, so it's another version of that. She's not trapped. Not trapped in space like some of these other stories we talked about. But there's isolation. There's her on a quest, on a mission. She has to do this thing by herself. Because here's the thing: the cat, not so much of help in the story. The cat's there. Cat's important, but not really helping out too much with the mission there. So she's by herself. She's got her cat, which is great. But that kind of person on a quest, person with a goal. So not stranded somewhere with the sole idea of trying to return home, but stranded somewhere with a specific goal in mind. I'm here for a reason. Right.
Right.
That's another twist, another take on the idea of loneliness in space.
So this is a book I had not heard of before today. This is an Alex pick to help us round out the month. And I'm going to say that if there's a line in the book where it's something like, "You still like me, right, Jelly Beans?" It's a book about loneliness.
Okay. I mean, she does talk to the cat. If
there's one of those things where it's like they're kind of tongue in cheek, pretending like they don't need anyone else by talking to an inanimate object or a cat or a dog or whatever. It's also depending on how heavily Jelly Beans is used. I think just the name Jelly Beans would be the Petsploitation month, which I have also pitched at some point, of just like, hey, their animals are cute. You like animals, right? Which I know that you're not prey to the Petsploitation stuff.
No,
you're only if it's a good story.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a good story, but but
the cuteness of animals will not sell you on something.
No, no, no. Nor will what happens to them. Like they live or they die. I don't care. Give me a good story. But important to mention too. I'm glad you didn't trip on that. The cat's name is Jelly Beans. It's not Jelly Bean. It is Jelly Beans.
Right. Well,
Which,
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, they have more. They have like five
very
or
important.
six
Yeah,
on each foot. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Every
I
owner
mentioned,
refers to them
yeah,
as jelly beans.
I mentioned Andrew MacLean. He's the sole creator here, the credited creator. If you know his name from anywhere, it's probably from Headlopper. It's a book he did over at Image, ran 16 issues, but it's a quarterly book. And it says so specifically, I think on the cover, it says like a quarterly adventure comic. So it ran from 2015 to 2021. So it was, never the expectation to be a monthly book. So the idea of like him having the space to write and draw a quarterly book over at Image,
Right.
I think is pretty wild. The fact that he's done that. He also wrote a book. He wrote a Godzilla book called War for Humanity over IDW, and he's contributed art and some writing on a handful of things here and there over at Marvel and DC. Like a little run on the Mighty Thor with Jason Aaron, kind of during the Jane Foster stuff. He just did some issues of the New Gods over at DC, the Rom V book that I think he was namely doing
This is supposed to
with
be
Evan
great.
Cagle.
I have
It's
not
a
spent
very,
any
very
time
cool
with
book.
it.
Yeah. 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 Pretty cool take on New Gods, plus some anthologies and short stories, kind of, those anthology books collections that both Marvel and DC do from time to time. He's contributed to that because he's the kind of person, you get a writer, artist, someone who can, do their own stuff. Kind of easy way to submit to if they have any kind of stories to contribute to any of those collections. And also he's done a bunch of covers as well because he's someone that people know in the business. And he's the guy from Headlopper who does that kind of weird adventure comic. He's got a style that is distinctive and people like. And so you'll see his work on covers, a lot of variant covers here and there. Again, for not just Marvel and DC, but also create own stuff over at Image and things like that. I'm sure other friends in the industry he'll work with that want to give him some work and showcase his talent as well. So yeah, we're going to finish off. We're going to finish off with that book. Finish off with the oldest book. So I think, as I mentioned, that book first came out in 2015 as a trade paperback, and then in 2020 was released as a hardcover special edition. So a little weird though. The hardcover came out in March 2020, which is a real interesting time to read a book about isolation and the end of the world and end times.
That might impact sales. What's curious to me is what creators think impacts book sales, because I don't know if you saw our Blue Sky reply back when we were doing November. Kurt Ankeny, I said something like, "Are we going to get like an all-in-one compendium edition?" He said, basically, he doesn't think the sales would justify it, and he blamed the pandemic.
Yeah,
and I was
that
like,
gap between books 1 and 2, probably.
Yeah, I'm like, I really doubt it was the pandemic. And I think a compendium is often a chance to pick up the market you missed the first time, right? Like if they could do a compendium for $40 in paperback, now with the names Matt Fraction and, Elsa Chartier, I think they could double the sales of the original OGN, especially since the OGN format was like $18 a pop 4 times to get the story, and the story doesn't hook you in like a real hooky way just with the first volume. So it's $18 and you have to just keep buying on good faith. So anyway,
who knows if it was, but I mean, it's I when I saw that release of March 2020 for this book, I was like, they clearly probably didn't plan that, but they released that book and then like, oh, wait a minute. Like what kind of the world we're re-releasing this book into is a whole lot different now than it was like when we first scheduled this. So,
but honestly, if it came out the first Wednesday in March, might have been relatively normal for a week or two. Not saying everybody runs to the shop every week.
Might have been, but
it's one of those very interesting things for like, if you were an adult and alive back then, you remember the difference between March 1st and March 18th or whatever it was. It was just and we were in the state that did the first mandatory business shutdowns in Ohio.
But yeah, so that'll be an interesting one to end with. Because it's slightly different than the 3 leading up to it. So, we'll have the knowledge and experience and the discussion of those 3, the previous 3, and kind of what those takes on our lonely sci-fi theme are, and get to view this final book, which is the earliest book publication wise, and kind of get to view it through all the lens of all four books, which I think be a lot of cool and a lot of fun. So
Yeah, we're gonna have fun as we go. By the way, I don't know if this was burned deeply into my subliminal subconscious, but March 18th, 2020, which was the date I threw out there, was a Wednesday.
yeah,
And that would have been a new comic day. And I think that was the first new comic day that shops weren't open. Because
yes.
I
'Cause
pre-COVID had been in a ritual of like,
Yeah.
that's how you and I met. It was like we were the 11 a.m. to noon crowd
Yeah.
on Wednesdays at the comic shop. So
Yeah, no, the 11th was when things really got bad, and then that weekend was when things started to shut down, and then that first Wednesday was the 18th, and would have been the ones that most likely did not. You were not going to the shop then. So
right, I think the books were
anywhere.
like those books maybe finished coming out, but they were like curbside pickup, and you had to wait a couple weeks or months for people to figure out what was going on and keep paying. But anyway, we'll reminisce about that during next January. We'll do a pandemic month or something. Just to keep our bleak Januaries going.
Or looking at 2027. What kind of real downer theme can we have for January to kick the year off like we have the last couple? So, but no, this is just lonely sci-fi. We joke about it being a downer, but these books aren't they're not meant to be. The theme isn't meant to be a downer. Because every exploration of
neither was Death Month.
Exactly. Because stories about death are stories about life, and stories about isolation can really be stories about community. And I think we'll see some of that as we go through. So as bleak as it may seem on the surface, not saying these books are all super fun, but I think there's something really interesting about exploring this idea through these different lenses, and I think that's the joy we get out of both planning and thinking about these theme months and then actually getting to jump into them. It's kind of seeing where these different threads take us, thinking about the theme kind of, superficially at first, right? Just kind of knowing how it applies to the books, but then getting to dive deeper into it and seeing what choices the creators make with their storytelling, as a way to reflect and kind of interpret that theme, whether or not they were thinking about it at the time. Right. We're going to try to make connections between these books from completely disparate creators and creative ideas and inputs. We're going to put ties in between them. And it's always fun to kind of dig around and see what those might be.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. And I have read all but one of them already, which is a rare situation for me. But fortuitous with a new baby in the house and my wife going back to work in January from maternity leave. So it will be rereading, which is great for me. It saves a lot of time. So I can just focus on notes and major beats. And like I said, Traveling to Mars, there's so many things where I could just sit and read quotes from that for 30 minutes. I'm not going to, but I could.
Genius to someone like Mark Russell.
Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for coming back for another year of Storied Arcs. And you can find us on storiedarcs.com, Blue Sky, and Instagram. And we will see you next week for Sentient.
Peace.